Now, Galen was very fond of saying that one man's meat is another man's poison in two respects. His favourite example, which he repeats in many treatises, is that hellebore is fine for quails but not for human beings, except in small quantities. Hemlock is harmless to starlings but not to human beings. And bitter vetch is harmful for human beings but not for cattle. And he pointed out that many human beings have to eat bitter vetch because they haven't got enough nourishment from anywhere else. So in Galen there's a very strong focus on the poor, the urban poor, the rural poor, in other words the majority of the ancient world. So Galen, writing for the emperor, for people who can afford to buy medicine books and cookery books, but he knows what peasants are eating as well. And he also knew, of course, that all individuals are different, and so what one person can eat with impunity will upset another person. The ancient Greeks provide a very rich tradition of culinary and nutritional literature, and that's why the topic of this conference interests me enormously. There's enormous detail in it and very important conceptual divisions, which is why I'm talking about nutrition and pleasure, very important in ancient thought. So key figures on the medical side are the Hippocratic doctors that Laurence talked about the other day, Plato in the 4th century BC and Galen in the 2nd century AD. And on the culinary side, the authors are not so well known. In item 2 on the handout you'll see Archestratus of Gala, the author of Europe's earliest cookery book. Vivienne is interested in medicine and the arts. He wrote in hexameter verse. So Europe's earliest cookery book it sounds like Homer. It really is quite striking. It's all about fish, which Homer famously excluded. So it's a real provocation to epic verse, to write cookery books about cooking fish in particular. And people are much more likely to know the late Roman collection attributed to Apicius, which is a very varied cookery book, which does have very elaborate preparations with expensive ingredients, but also from a different tradition, cheap and alternative ways of making foods that you don't have access to. So that is a compilation which is with a very complex history. Now item 1 on your handout, there is a handout for people who come in late, is from the author Athenaeus of Naucratis, who gives us a list of ancient cookery books, all of which have disappeared. You'll see item 1, the Lydians also invented carucae, that is a mixture of spices, meat, stock and cheese. Recipes for this dish are given by the authors of cookbooks, Oxar Ka, Glaucus of Locris, Mithaichus, Dionysius, the two Heraclides, Agis, Epinetus, Dionysius, Hegesippus, Erasistratus, Euthydemus and Crito, Stephanus, Archytas, Archesias, Diocles and Philistion. These are all the writers of cookbooks that I am aware of, and he is somebody who spent all his life in libraries. So if anybody could find a trace of a cookery book, it's this guy, apart from what people had in private kitchens. And it's striking that at least 4 of these authors are medical authors. And Galen himself says that he was going to write a cookery book. We don't know whether he ever did or not, or I don't know if he ever did or not. But there's no problem about a medical writer writing a cookery book. They're not different categories in that sense. But in another sense, they are. They're in very different categories. And many authors, including Galen, followed the basic division which Plato makes between medical books and medical advice, which doctors give for our benefit to make us more healthy, in contrast to cookery books which are written to give us pleasure. So the cooks just have things with nice tastes which may not be for our benefit, and that's a crucial distinction between what is beneficial and what is pleasurable. And the cookery book of Archestratus is called The Life of Luxury, Heidu Patheia, the experience of nice things. And it's not just a provocation to the Homeric tradition, it's also a provocation to Plato. Pleasure is a really good thing, says Archestratus. I've given you, it exists in 62 fragments, about 300 lines, and I've given you an example of it in item 2. I won't go through it in detail, but it's about how you cook grey mullet. And apart from anything else, you must buy your grey mullet from the right place. You'll see Miletus is mentioned, and Brachia in western Greece, Lake Bolbe in northern Greece. So you must buy you buy it commercially. Fish was expensive in ancient Greece, just as it is now. There's instruction on how to cook it. Roast them whole and unscaled carefully since they're tender. Serve them drenched in brine. Don't do it in an Italian style. They ruin fish. Put cheese on everything. And at the very end of that fragment, these are very suitable for a feast. They are the Italians are capable of cleverly devising many types of sticky little dishes full of seasonings and other nonsense. So you must cook it my way and not that other way. But this business about full of seasonings and other nonsense, this is a classic medical critique of what cooks do. They make things too complex and mix things up which are not the same. Complexity is what cooks are seeking, not this one, but all the other ones he's criticising. And Hippocrates and Galen have precisely the same criticism of cooks. They create pleasure by making complexity and variety, and that is not conducive to good medicine. Now, Galen, in his treatise on nutrition, refers to cooking all the time. Just as I told you in the Hippocratic account of how civilization came into being, so in Galen, foods need to be processed, cooked or processed in other ways, with pickles or whatever, in order to make them assimilable into the human system. So that the human digestion cooks food with body heat, and it does it better if the food is correctly prepared in a civilized way. So item 3 on the handout, he's talking about a sort of pancake there, and you'll see he gives you different terms for the pancake depending which Greek dialect you're speaking. So he has a very scholarly approach to all this. He tells you you put the oil in the frying pan, you cook one side of the pancake first, then you turn it over. I think you'll find if you want to make pancakes, that's not a bad recipe book to follow. And then he says in the second paragraph, it is obvious that this has thick juice, koulos, restrains the stomach and gives rise to crude humours. In other words, the body will assimilate humours that are not properly concocted, that it has not been properly prepared for the body. It will assimilate these unsuitable raw humours, which will accumulate in the body and produce adverse effects. So, the cook can do something about this. This is why some mix honey with it, and there are those who also mix in sea salt. This will counteract this uncooked quality. This then would be a class of flat cake, just as country folk and very poor town dwellers make many other such flat cakes from whatever is to hand.